Hobyah, Hobyah, Hobyah. Tear down the hemp stalks. Eat the old man and eat the old woman, and carry away the little girl. Long ago, in the land where they built their homes out of hemp stalks, there was a family that lived deep in the hemp stalk forest. An old man, an old woman, and a very young little girl. And they lived a peaceful, calm life in the deep, dark forest. But every night, when it became very dark and everything seemed still and quiet, there in the forest lived a creature that would begin to come towards the house. And they would say, Hobyah, Hobyah, Hobyah. Tear down the hemp stalk. Eat the old man and the old woman, and carry away the little girl. The Hobyah had come. But one thing you need to understand that all of the Hobyah were terrified of, and that is a dog. And fortunately, there at the house that was built of hemp stalks, deep in the forest, where the old man and the old woman and the little girl lived, they had a little dog there also. And as the Hobyahs approached, that little dog began to bark and bark and bark as loud as he could, and it scared the Hobyahs away. But sadly, the old man woke up and said, "That little dog kept me awake all night long with his barking. And if I live till morning, I'm going to cut off his tail." And sure enough, the next morning, when the old man woke up, he went out to the shed and he got a big axe. And he grabbed the little dog by the neck and took him over to the chopping block and laid him on the chopping block and whack! Chopped off his little tail. Well, again, that night, as the old man and the old woman and the little girl slept in their home, Hobyah, Hobyah, Hobyah. Tear down the hemp stalk. Eat the old man, eat the old woman, and carry away the little girl. The Hobyahs had returned. But that little dog was still alive, and he was still there, and even though his tail had been chopped off, when the Hobyahs came, he began to bark, and he barked, and he barked, and he barked, until the Hobyahs ran away. Well, the old man woke up because of the barking, and he said, "That dog kept me awake all night long, and if I live till morning, I'm going to chop off his back legs." And sure enough, the next morning when the old man got up, he went out to the shed and he got his axe, and he grabbed the little dog by the back of the neck, and he took him to the chopping block. Whack, whack! He chopped off his back legs. Well, that night, as they were again sleeping in their home, Hobyah, Hobyah, Hobyah. Tear down the hemp stalk. Eat the old man, eat the old woman, and carry away the little girl. But fortunately, that dog was still there. He was not dead. And he barked, and he barked, and he barked as loud as he could, and the Hobyahs left. But the old man once again had been awakened by the dog's barking, and he said, "That dog kept me awake all night, and if I live till morning, I'm going to chop off his front legs." Well, the next day, he went out to the shed, and he got his axe, and he grabbed the dog by the back of his neck, took him to the chopping block, whack, whack, chopped off his two front legs. That night, once again, as the old man and the old woman and the little girl were sleeping, Hobyah, Hobyah, Hobyah. Tear down the hemp stalks, eat the old man, eat the old woman, and carry away the little girl. And as those Hobyahs approached, the little dog, though he had no legs and he had no tail, he was still alive, and he could still bark. And he knew the Hobyahs were coming, and so he barked and he barked and he barked as much as he could. and the Hobyahs left. But sadly, the old man was awakened once again, and he said to himself, "That little dog kept me awake all night long, and if I live till morning, I'm going to chop off his head." Sure enough, the next morning, the old man, with bitterness in his heart, went to the shed and grabbed his axe, and he took the little dog by the scruff of the neck and took him to the chopping block, and sadly, whack, chopped off the little dog's head. Well, that night, once again, as they did every night, the Hobyahs appeared. "Hobyah, Hobyah, Hobyah, tear down the hymn stalks, eat the old man, eat the old woman, and carry away the little girl." And they waited patiently, and they listened, and there was no dog barking. So they went to the house that was made of hymn stalks, and they tore down the hymn stalks, and they grabbed the old man and they ate him, and they grabbed the old woman and they ate her, and then they found the little girl and they threw her in a sack, and they threw her over their back, and they went back into the deep, dark forest. And the Hobyahs went on and on and on for many, many miles, until finally it was soon going to be daylight, and the Hobyahs knew they had to return to their lair, and they had to hide from the daylight because the sun would soon be rising. So they took the little girl, who was tied up in a sack, and they brought her over to a place where they had a large wooden trunk with a heavy lock on the trunk. And they opened it up and they dropped the sack down into the trunk. And then they put the sack in there and closed the trunk down, and they knocked on the top of the trunk 3 times. Knock, knock, knock. And they said, "Look and see, look and see." And the Hobyah went to their lair to sleep during the daytime. Well, while the Hobyahs were sleeping in their lair, soon the sun came up, and the little girl was all alone in that sack which was inside of that wooden trunk. And she was crying because she was all alone and no one was there to help her. But fortunately, there in the forest, walking nearby, was a brave woodsman. And he also had his brave dog with him, and they were walking together in the forest. And he heard what he thought was the sound of a little girl crying. And he listened, and he looked, and he went to where the wooden trunk was at. And when he got there, he heard the crying come from within the trunk. So he broke the lock and lifted the lid and opened the sack, and inside of the sack was the little girl. And he said, "Little girl, don't cry. I'll bring you home to my house, and my wife and my daughter, we will take you in, and you will live with us, and we will take care of you." So he carefully lifted her out of the sack, and he put her on his shoulder. And then he said, "Wait one moment." And he took his own dog and put his dog in the sack, tied up the sack, and then closed the trunk lid down again, put the lock back on, and he took the little girl away. Well, that night after the sun went down, the Hobyahs came out of their lair, and they walked to where the trunk was, and the Hobyahs all gathered around. And they knocked on the top of that lid 3 times. And they said, "Look and see, look and see." And they took the lock off of the box, and they opened the lid of the box, and then they carefully untied the sack, and out jumped that dog, and he grabbed the Hobyahs and he ate every one of them, and the Hobyahs could not escape from the huntsman's dog, and he was ravenous and killed every one of the Hobyahs. And that is why, to this day, There are no Hobyahs in the world. The end.